communist, and I did not speak out, because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist.
Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me.
First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a communist.
Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist.
Then, they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist.
Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew.
And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak out for me.
Hello everybody, I'm Bishop Robert Byrne and I'm the Catholic Bishop of Hexham and Newcastle, and I have happy memories last year of being with you in Billingham at St Michael's for this Holocaust remembrance service. And unfortunately, of course, we can't be together again this year, but I'm pleased to be able to at least share with you a few thoughts and to thank you as well for the efforts that you put in making this event possible. I'd firstly like to thank St Mary, the schools of St Mary's in Newcastle and also St Michael's in Billingham, and also the interreligious team of the Diocese of Hexham and Newcastle who worked so hard to put all this together. Once more, please God, next year we'll be able to meet properly in order to celebrate this day together. Of course, I want to also thank the Jewish community, as always, for their contribution to this this evening, this day we have, and especially to my friend Rabbi Aaron, who has been a great support in the last years. So, where are we? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We are probably rather tired of the whole thing now and really rather frightened as well of what the future will be. And I think that's rather like how many of the Jewish community must have felt in the 1930s. And to be a light in the darkness is for us a challenge, as certainly it would have been for them all those years ago. To be a light in the darkness means that we carry with us, we carry in our hearts hope, the hope of light, the hope of better days. And many of those victims of the Holocaust didn't live to see an earthly light, but they are for us a light. They are for us a light in that darkness when we feel there's nothing else around. And I think that those people are a great inspiration for us, and they can be a way for us to understand the darkness in which we are living now. So we thank God for the fact that we have this witness. We thank God for hope, the hope that springs eternal, the hope that is in every human heart. And we pray that all of us will one day be able to enjoy the light that God gives us. So as we celebrate this day, let us remember with sorrow, certainly, the victims of the Holocaust. Let us be aware that we must always have in our minds that this must never happen again. And indeed, the reason we are having this event today is simply that we won't let this happen again. We won't let this happen. We will allow hope and light into our lives. We will live by that light, live by that hope, so that all of us will live as brothers and sisters. So thank you again, all of you who have made this day possible, and let us learn from it, and let us also be aware of our responsibilities to future generations.
The light in the darkness is the theme for 2021 Holocaust Memorial Day. And I want to share with you two stories that reflect this theme. Candles and light are hugely important in many faiths and for many people. And I'm going to look at the winter festival of Hanukkah, because this festival plays a hugely important part in the two stories. The first story is set in Kiel, a very small town in Germany, in 1931. And you can see in the picture behind me that the Nazi headquarters in the town of Kiel that had 500 Jewish residents. It was the very last day of Hanukkah, and the rabbi's wife had put the Chanukiah in the window. Now, let me just explain about Hanukkah. A story that goes back over 2,500 years ago, when a rather bumptious ruler, Antiochus, took over what to us now is the Holy Land and tried to impose his Hellenic ideas of statues and making Jews very, very frightened of worshipping the God that they cannot see. He espied the temple in Jerusalem, and though he didn't destroy it, he vandalized it. And the main thing that he did was he sent his soldiers in to destroy the 7-branched candlestick menorah. After the Maccabees, who were the young fighters, overcame the Antiochus' army, they went back and were devastated to see the state of the temple, and set about cleaning it, getting rid of the statues, getting rid of the rubbish that was in there, and rededicating it to God. And that's actually what Hanukkah means. Not a festival of light. But they had a problem because they didn't have the menorah. And apparently they used spears to create a new one. And the oil, because that's what they used then, was damaged. The pots of oil were damaged. Somebody had the foresight to hide a tiny pot of oil right at the back, and that was found. And the candlestick was lit. And then they thought, but we've only got enough for a day. But in fact, a miracle happened. The oil lasted for 8 days, because that would have been the amount of time to go to the town where the oil was made. Don't forget, it was donkeys and camels that would carry, and then bring them back and keep it going, because that was a symbol of God's presence. So although that is 7, today we use the 8-branched candlestick with the helper in the middle, the shamash. So let's have a look at the first story that you see, where you see the picture. You can see the Nazi presence with the banners with the swastika on. And it was directly across the road from the family Posner. And on that cold December night, the 8 lights of the Chanukiah were glowing brightly in her window. Rachel, Rabbi Posner's wife, had the foresight to actually take this photograph. So, freezing in time, an iconic picture which nobody then knew where it came from. And it survived World War II and eventually ended up at Yad Vashem, which is the central Holocaust Museum and Research Center in Jerusalem, in Israel. And it is their grandson who then bequeathed it to them. And he still got the original shot. And when their inquiries led to this man, he explained that his grandmother and grandfather left Kiel in Germany in 1934. And before that time, the Rabbi Posner, had talked not just to Jewish people within the town, but also to the German people in the town. And he persuaded most of the citizens to leave around the time that he did, before things got really, really difficult. Now, although the Chanukiah belongs to Yad Vashem, every year they return it to Rabbi Posner's grandson so that he and his family can celebrate with this fantastic, iconic Chanukiah. So what they are doing is they are remembering that they are the light in the darkness. Another story that I would like to share with you is that of Rabbi Hugo Gryn. Hugo Gryn, with his father, ended up in the concentration camp of Auschwitz. And over the centuries, there have been times where Jews have been persecuted, found it difficult to light the candles for Hanukkah, and there's even an extract in Anne Frank's diary about how they managed to do it, but in fact couldn't keep the Chanukiah alight because they needed the candles during the rest of the winter. Hugo Gryn was a child in Auschwitz. The holiday of Hanukkah came, and after fashioning a makeshift Chanukiah, his father melted the precious margarine ration to light a wick for the first night of Hanukkah. The young Hugo was absolutely outraged, and he protested to his father. How could he use the food which sustained them in the midst of such horror just to remember a Jewish festival? Many, many, many years later, Rabbi Gryn said that at that moment, his father spoke words he would never forget. His father said, "My child, we know you can live 3 days without water. You can live 3 weeks without food, but you cannot live for 3 minutes without hope."
The Rwandan genocide took place frighteningly close to our own day. We would like to share with you the story of one young woman who was a 22-year-old engineering student when the genocide took place. Immaculée was at home with her family for the Easter holidays when the killing began in April 1994. Her family were Tutsis, the tribe that was attacked by extremist members of the Hutu tribe when the moderate Hutu president was killed in a plane crash. Her father sent her for sanctuary to the home of a moderate Hutu neighbor, a Protestant pastor, someone whom they trusted. This man bravely sheltered a number of Tutsi women from those who were prepared to kill as many Tutsis as they could. 8 women, the youngest just 7 years old, hid in a small bathroom just 3 by 4 feet, while hundreds of Hutus, armed with machetes, searched the area around them and even the house itself, determined to kill as many Tutsis as they could find. Horrifyingly, Immaculée heard one of them, someone she knew from primary school, talking about how he had killed 399 cockroaches and would like Immaculée to be the 400th. This horrible way of talking about the Tutsis and dehumanizing them was spread about by voices on the radio. Immaculée came from a devout Catholic family, and her father had given her a rosary when she left. She tried to pray, but struggled with doubt. Where is God when there is so much suffering and evil about? She also found the words about forgiveness in the Our Father difficult. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. How could she possibly forgive those who were killing her family and trying to kill her? However, she believed this was an important prayer composed by Jesus himself. So she persevered in prayer and came to realize that it was very important not to add to the hatred in the world, but instead to pray for those doing evil, that they might be converted. When they were finally able to come out of hiding after 3 months, she had to face the awful reality that all of her family, apart from one brother who was studying abroad, had been savagely killed. Her parents, grandparents, 2 brothers, friends and neighbours were all gone, along with thousands of others. At first, she was filled with anger and despair. However, through faith, she realized that these people she had lost were safe in the next life. It was now up to her to use whatever time she had left in this world to promote love rather than hatred, and to work for reconciliation in any way she could. This is what she has done ever since, and if you Google Immaculée from Rwanda, you will find more information about her.
The butterfly, the very last, so richly, brightly, dazzlingly yellow. Perhaps if the sun's tears would sing against a white stone, such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. For 7 weeks I've lived in here, penned up inside this ghetto. But I have found my people here. The dandelions call to me, and the white chestnut candles in the court. Only I never saw another butterfly. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto.
I was born on the 17th of July 1925, believe it or not, in Breslau, which is now Polish and called Wrocław.
Tell me about your parents.
Well, we were a typical, completely assimilated Jewish family. The Jewishness didn't play any role at all. My father was a lawyer and my mother was a violinist. And there was always music in the house. My father also had a very good voice and he used to love to sing Schubert songs and stuff. So there was always music in the house, and I had a very happy childhood.
You had 2 sisters.
Yes, I was the youngest of 3 girls, much to the disgust of my father, who would have preferred sons, but you can't choose that. And my memories of my home are wonderful, really.
What was family life like?
Very relaxed. We had a lot of freedom, which was not so usual in those days. It's a long time ago, but it was a happy family.
You used to play chamber music?
Yes, there was a lot of music in the house, and it was quite normal,
Tell me about your father's attitude to languages.
Oh yes, it's quite interesting. Well, we were brought up speaking French because my father was very, he had always saying, you have as many souls as you have languages, and it's quite true because you express yourself differently in every language. So we were basically really brought up bilingually. The one rule I didn't like at all, that on Sundays, because we had a young girl living with us, a French girl who was teaching us French. And when she left, my father was afraid we might forget it. So on Sundays we had to speak French only, which I found extremely annoying and couldn't understand why. So I never opened my mouth on Sundays.
what age did you start playing the cello?
Oh, very young. I showed my wish to play the cello by sitting on the floor with a broom and a comb and pretending to play the cello. So my parents brought me a quarter-sized cello. It was so small my mother could put it under her chin. And it was obvious I wanted to play the cello. So they bought me finally a cello, and I had lessons, and yeah.
And your sister Renata, did she play the violin?
She played the violin, but she hated it. I think she had a bad teacher, that was probably the reason. And my elder sister played the piano, and so we played trios together as children, and, you know, the usual.
Your elder sister Marianne, she was interested in something else. What was her thing?
Well, she was a very committed Zionist. I mean, she was the eldest, and she understood what was going on in Germany. And her big idea was to go to Palestine and to build up the country and become a worker, and all the idea which was normal in those days, that you go to university and study something, didn't appeal to her at all. She wanted to learn a trade and do something useful.
And that was carpentry, wasn't it?
Yeah, she became a carpenter.
And then, what age were you when you went to Berlin to study the cello?
Well, you know, what with the 1933 and the arrival of the Nazis, everything became very complicated. And since I had Jewish cello teachers, they'd all emigrated. There was nobody there anymore to teach me the cello. So it was decided to send me to Berlin, whether there was still... In Berlin, things were a bit easier because such a big town. Not everybody knows everybody else. So it was arranged that I should have cello lessons with Leo Rostal. And yeah, and that lasted for about 6 months. And then came Kristallnacht and the 9th of November, and then everything fell to pieces, really.
Just give us a little bit of background. What was Kristallnacht?
It was obviously planned for a long time, that apparently the fury of the German people was roused, which resulted in them smashing up Jewish shops, arresting Jewish people, sending them to concentration camps. That was the beginning of the end, really. That was called Kristallnacht because of all the glass that was shattered from the shops that were looted. Of course, it was a big looting party, really.
Your father escaped being arrested. Why?
Well, there was a very, very nice family of violin makers in Breslau who were 150% anti-Nazi. And his name was Walter Mehne. And what he did, he got into his car, a Mercedes, which was very, very well known in Germany, and went to our house, collected my father, and drove him all day long around without being stopped, thank God, because he had been stopped. He would have been in trouble and my father would have been arrested, but he got away with it, and my father was one of the very few people who were not arrested in those days. This is just an incident that there were some Germans who were very decent. He was deported in 1942.
Let's just talk about that year 1942 and how your lives changed.
We were still in Breslau, pretending at normality a little bit. I mean, I still practiced the cello, and we had to leave our apartment, of course, and move in with an aunt and uncle, which was catastrophic. And then the deportations began. But by that time, Renate and I had already were conscripted to work to work. So we landed up in a paper factory near Breslau. And then my parents had a sort of communication that they have to report in 24 hours at a certain place. In other words, deportations had begun. And of course, you know, normally children want to stay with their parents, but my father was a very wise man. He said, where we are going, you get there soon enough. So he must have known exactly what's happening. And sort of the last night that he was still at home, he gave me all sorts of instructions, what I have to do, how to play the gas. And he said, I count on you, Anita. So I lived all my life thinking that my father should have a look and see whether I'm doing the right thing. Needless to say, we never saw them again.
You managed to receive 3 postcards from
Yes, it was a slightly unusual deportation. They differed a lot. They were all collected near Breslau, near a railway station, a sort of subsidiary railway station, and then arrived in Ispica, the place is called, near Lublin, and somehow he managed to smuggle still 3 notes out. One of them said that my mother couldn't write, she was already ill, and in his last letter, I don't know how it reached us, this is a mystery to me, he's just written a psalm, I lift up my eyes to the heavens, from whence cometh my help. But of course it never came, so we never saw them again. Yeah, that was that. I was 16, nearly 7 years, 16, 17 we were.
So what happened then?
Well, we were left in the apartment suddenly on our own. Everybody else had been deported. And so there was a sort of skeleton of Jewish community still in Breslau. Somehow or other we were taken into an orphanage. But by that time we had already planned somehow not to just sit and wait till we get deported, but try and get away. It's quite a long story, because in the factory there were a lot of foreigners, and among them French prisoners of war. And somehow we made contact with them because we could speak the language, and a way was found to forge papers also for French people to escape. And we decided one day that we must also try and escape. And some not very convincing, I believe, false papers were produced, and Renate and I tried to get to the unoccupied zone of France, which is something that nobody seems to know what it's about anymore. That was one part of France which was not occupied by the Germans, and there were possibilities to hide somewhere. We had heard, everything was so vague, we were children, don't forget. It was like an adventure. I'm not going to sit and wait till somebody comes and picks me up in order to kill me. I'm going to try and get away. Well, since I'm still here, I obviously succeeded.
How did your escape plan work out? What happened? At what point were you caught?
Well, it was all arranged to catch a certain train to Paris, and I had a lot of little notes with me, clandestine, who I should contact, etc. But the Gestapo had followed us already for quite a long time, and we were arrested at the very railway station as we were going to board the train. So we never got anywhere.
What happened on the way to the police station?
Well, in those days, there was a lot of suicide going on, because it was a better idea to decide yourself when you're going to die and not wait for the Gestapo to kill you. So a friend of mine had the amenities of procuring some cyanide. I think back we were teenagers. So he gave us the cyanide just in case we get arrested. And this was in a little bottle. And when we were arrested finally and sat at the station in Breslau waiting to be taken to the Gestapo headquarters, we suddenly thought, well, maybe this is the moment to do it. We've been caught. So I managed to divide, I had the powder in a sort of, can't remember now, paper, I suppose, and gave half of it to my sister. So we felt we are in charge. And as we were being marched to the Gestapo along the Gartenstrasse, we decided to take the damn stuff. So we thought we'd better take it all same time, So we counted up to 3 and started to lick it And instead of dying, we were still alive. So what had happened, to make the story as short as possible, my friend Konrad Latte wasn't so happy giving us this deadly stuff and had changed it. It looked like sugar, white powder. So I was in fact quite glad to still be walking, although we were walking towards the Gestapo, but you know, the idea of killing myself did not appeal to me all that much. Yeah.
So you changed it to icing sugar?
Changed it to icing sugar, yes.
You spent a year in prison, and then what happened in 1943?
We spent a year in prison, and because we had committed a crime on top of being Jewish, we had the great good fortune to be handed over to the law department. It meant that we stayed in prison for nearly a year, which we already understood very soon was a blessing, because nobody kills you normally in prisons, you know, but we were locked into a cell, and we were allowed for half an hour. All we were allowed in the way of movement is half an hour a day, going into the yard and walking in a circle silently, looking on the floor, and that was the exercise. But we were given work to do, thank God, and we had to paint toy soldiers. The crime was forgery, Fluchtversuch is trying to escape, and helping the enemy. These were the crimes. Okay, but we never really finished our sentences because prisons were so overfilled, and as soon as we finished with the legal department, the Gestapo was there again. And only after a few days, I was sent to Auschwitz. Never finished my sentence.
What was your first impressions when you arrived in Auschwitz?
Well, by the time I arrived in Auschwitz, I knew what was going on in Auschwitz. So I really arrived prepared as far as possible to go straight into a gas chamber. But it was all different. My first impression of Auschwitz, you know, I think of a lot of screaming and dreadful smell and smoke, you know, because there we have the gas chambers. Well, then everything was different from what I expected. You know, one thing was already lucky. I did not arrive in Auschwitz with the usual thousands of people, Jewish people, who were deported from the west to the east and then selected at the Rampe who goes in the gas chamber and who stays in to work. I arrived in a very small transport only with prisoners so that was, it was in fact advantageous to be a criminal rather than a normal person. So it was all slightly different from the norm. So we were taken to a barrack first or overnight, and then we were taken to the reception center. And there's a huge block where there are a lot of prisoners sitting who are doing the work of shaving your head and tattooing a number on your arm. And these are all prisoners who do that work. Now, of course, they are very interested to find out what's happening at the outside world. So the girl who was sort of processing me, we were talking. She said, you know, she asked me, how long do you think the war is going to take and what's going on and what did you do before the war? And I said, I used to play the cello, completely mad. I mean, what's the cello got to do with Auschwitz? And then, of course, that changed everything for me. She said, fantastic. Stand here. You must imagine, by that time I had no hair, a number on my arm, and I was naked. I had no clothes anymore. Stand here and wait and don't move. And she went, because in Birkenau there was an orchestra which badly needed somebody to play the cello. So, I mean, yeah, that was a turning point. You couldn't escape the typhus because you couldn't escape the lice. I mean, you tried your best to delouse yourself. Everybody had typhus, but I survived it. But even in the typhus, by the time I was in the Revier, which is a pseudonym for the so-called hospital, there were always selections in that hospital. And I have a very clear memory, and I was lying there half dead, of two Gestapo people looking at the bed, and somebody said, "No, this is a cellist," and they walked past because they needed a cellist.
So when you say selections, just be clear, what are the selections?
A selection is that you have to parade naked in front of the important people who would decide, no, that she can work still, but no, this guy, you know, choosing who can live and who can die. Yeah.
So at that point, it was pretty clear that the cello had saved
It was
your
completely
life.
clear that it was the cello every time that saved not only my life but also my sister's life, because people knew, because she was also more dead than alive and was in a position where she had already been chosen to go to the gas chamber, and she said, "But I'm the sister of the cellist." So she told me that one of the Gestapo people gave her a kick in the behind and pushed her to the right side. So the cello was a very important tool in my survival.
What was your job as cellist?
Well, the whole thing was really, you know, you mustn't forget that Auschwitz and Birkenau were surrounded by factories like IG Farben, Buna, you know, all these factories. And the people from the camp were walking out every morning to work in these factories. And our job was to stand or sit at the gate and play marches so that they should march out to music. And the same in the evening.
The Russians were advancing, the war was going the wrong way, Stalingrad had been a disaster.
Correct,
for the
yes.
Germans. What happened, how did that affect you in Auschwitz at this point, 1944?
Well, how it affected us, that it was obvious that the war was going badly for the Germans. Their interest in the music also waned. And just one day we were asked to come out of the block and stand in front of the block, and they separated the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people, and they took all the Jewish people, and we had to board a train.
What did you think was happening at that point?
We had no idea, but I can tell you that we were deliriously happy to get away from Auschwitz. You know, we're not in the going to the gas chamber. We're actually making a distance between Auschwitz and ourselves. I think that was, I mean, it's a long time ago, I can't exactly describe, but I think the mere fact to actually leave Auschwitz, maybe there is a glimmer of hope. Yeah.
And that train took you where?
That train took us west. We didn't know where we were going. There were all sorts of rumors. You're going to a reconvalescence camp. It's called Bergen-Belsen. Nobody had ever heard of it. So yeah, we drove west, and one day, I think it was 3 or 4 days of rather unpleasant journey, because we were in an open, you know, what do you call it?
Wagon.
Yeah. We arrived in this peculiar place, Belsen, and yeah. How can I, you know, people always ask me what was better, Belsen or Auschwitz? There's no better, doesn't come into it. It was different. In Auschwitz, they had the most sophisticated way of murdering people. In Belsen, you didn't need that. You died anyway. Belsen was a moratorium. I mean, not at the beginning. I mean, but more and more people were brought from the east, and Belsen became a complete disaster. There was no organization, no food, no nothing, nothing but dead bodies piling up. That was Belsen.
You managed to stick together with your sister and your
yeah, and the
colleagues.
people from the orchestra. We formed a sort of family which I think was life-saving. We looked after each other, we bullied each other to make sure that we keep as clean as possible, and yeah, we were a very coherent. I mean, we stuck together, and I think that helped a lot. To be alone there, you haven't got a hope in hell. Yeah.
So your day-to-day existence in Belsen, this is from what, November 44 to April 45?
Correct.
That's 6 months. How would you describe you know, how would you just, what comes to mind when you think
Well,
of your day?
we were also quite fortunate because we were given some sort of work at one time. We were taken to something called Weberei, where we had to make plats out of cellophane, which I suppose made very strong ropes. We did that for a while, which was wonderful to have something to do, you know. But that even that didn't last very long.
And what was the food situation? How did it work?
Well, the food, it was, there's only one word to describe it: chaos. There was nothing organized like now some soup, even if it's water. And then there were days where there was nothing and no bread, and you know, you just really starved in the end. Yeah.
In April 1945, describe the 15th of April of 45. What was that day?
Well, I mean, we were just sitting around waiting for the end, really, basically. And then suddenly there was a loudspeaker. We could hear a loudspeaker, and we could hear funny noises from outside. And the British Army had arrived. I mean, it's an unbelievable moment. We were actually still alive when we were liberated.
What was spoken over the loudspeaker?
I think English.
Do you remember the words?
Yes, I mean, I think they said, "Don't leave the camp, we were trying to find help." I would have to think very hard to know exactly. Maybe it was in other languages as well, I can't really remember. I think of it more in English now, but I mean, yeah.
And when you first saw the British soldiers, what was the feeling? What was your reaction?
It is very hard to describe. You mustn't forget one thing also, was very important. When the British Army came near Belsen, Hanover, etc., they heard that there was a prison camp, and so they were going to liberate that prison camp. But nobody could have imagined what they find. That wasn't a prison camp. That was just a mountain of corpses. So also for the British, everything changed suddenly. They knew they simply had to get help here, and, you know. Yes, and then came a few very, very critical days, because the British thought we must get help. We must leave the camp and get help. And in those days, the various watchtowers were manned by Hungarians, because the Hungarians were very friendly with the Germans. So there were a few days of complete chaos, because the Hungarians were very scared of us, and there was a lot of shooting going on, which was quite unnecessary for a few days, till the British came back again.
So the British came, liberated you, left again.
Left in order to get help.
Hungarian soldiers were shooting prisoners.
Yeah. Not a very nice, that lasted a couple of days or something. But can you imagine the problems for the British Army to find help? I mean, we are still in a war, you know. What can they find? They wanted to get medical help. It was, yeah, complete disaster area. But they did a fantastic job, I must say. Eventually, it was fantastic what help they brought. And
what happened to you and Renata when after the liberation, in the first year after liberation?
Well, I mean, you can imagine now this British Army is now faced with thousands of peculiar people. They don't know who they are. What are we going to do with them? Of course, they're trying to get rid of us. So, which was quite a logical idea, they divided us into nationalities. So there were the French people, the Belgian people, the Dutch people, and these people's governments had facilities to receive these people and, you know, help them on. But if you ask me what my nationality is, I have to say I'm German, which was, of course, a complete disaster. In those days, to be German was like having a contagious disease, you know. So I have to say, no, I'm not really German. I was just born in Germany, but I'm Jewish. And unfortunately, that isn't always necessarily a recommendation either. So it didn't take long before my sister and I realized that we are having a problem again. We are Jewish. Yeah, the rest is history. Well, it's still a problem after all these years.
So you did make it to England?
With a lot of difficulties, a little bit of forging papers. It was not easy. But finally a law was passed that one could join. If you had family in England, you could come. So I finally came to England, yes.
Now, and after you came to England, you picked up the cello again. And
Yeah, that's all I had in mind, yes, to do what I always wanted to do, that I've been stopped from doing. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your cello career.
My cello career.
In the 60s, 70s.
Well, I found myself a cello teacher. Luckily, I mean, also some difficulties, but I finished up with somebody who was completely right for me. And I became, I got to know quite a few other musicians, etc. And in one of these houses that I lived with other musicians, it was Emanuel Hurwitz, who said one day, look, I'm trying to form a chamber orchestra. Would you like to join? And at first I said, not really, because I play in so many orchestras. Come along, it'll be fun. And that was the beginning of the English Chamber Orchestra. Yes, so I was very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. So as a musician, I had a fantastically interesting life. I've seen the world and played with fantastic people, and yeah.
Now, in the last 20 years, you've been very busy in Holocaust education.
Yes, and then I wrote a book. That's right, somebody said you should write your story down. Anyway, I wrote a book which became quite a success and followed with invitations to speak to young people, to young Germans. And that's what I've done for the last 20 years. Get in touch with the youth now, because the Germans have also a lot of problems. You know, the descendants of the baddies, and very few people know who was a baddie and who wasn't. So there are a lot of problems in Germany as well.
What's your message now to young people who, in the face of rising anti-Semitism, and
my message is slightly different now because of this unbelievable resurgence of anti-Semitism, which is really extremely worrying. My message is now to be a little bit more curious about who are these people, these Jews, and not talk about Jews. I prefer to say people of Jewish origin, because you have no idea how diverse Jewish people are. I mean, very few people know there are Sephardic people and Ashkenazi people. Well, they are the people, the Ashkenazis are from Russia, Poland, etc., and the Sephardis are from the Middle East. Completely different type of person, but Jews. And yes, it's this complete ignorance who Jews are, and why do we think that Jews want to rule the world and all that sort of thing. The fact is that if you learn a little about Jewish history, that Jews were not allowed to have any professions other than tavern keepers, trading with animals, and money changers. That was their three professions. For hundreds and hundreds of years, that is what Jews were doing, and were not allowed into any other profession. Eventually, this was changed a little bit, and some Jews were allowed to move into towns, but only if they had enough money, not right into the towns. In other words, what I'm to tell you, that Jews, if you actually read the right books, have been treated so abominably badly and are being reproached with the very things that are being done to them. And it's very difficult to defend yourself as a Jew. And now what is so unforgivable, there is now a place called Israel, and Jews for the first time defend themselves and that is not really what we expect of Jews, etc. So we're talking about quite a problem. I hope that some of you who are listening to this will be interested enough to find out a little bit about who are these people, these funny people, the Jews. Yeah. Maybe could be some hope that we don't actually, you don't have to like them, but don't kill them.
Adonai roi lo eksa binot desheyarbitzeni Adonai roi lo eksa amei menuchot ינהלני נפשי ישובב ינחני ומעגלת צדק ינחני ומעגלת צדק למען שמו נפשי ישובב ינחני ומעגלת צדק ינחני ומעגלת צדק למען שמו נפשי ישובב גם ילד בגיא צמא וסלו אירא רע כי אתה עמדי דאך לפניי שלך נגד צורריי תשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה כוסי רוויה כוסי רוויה כוסי רוויה גם כילד בגיא צמא וסלו אירא רע כי אתה עמדי דאך לפניי שלך נגד צורריי תשנת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויה כוסי רוויה כוסי רוויה אדוני רואי לו אחסה
The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day is Be the Light in the Darkness. Before every genocide, perpetrators divide society into those considered worthy of human treatment and those who are not. Distortions are deployed using propaganda and stereotyping to identify and victimize a specific group or groups, followed by discrimination that's often enshrined in law. The darkness leading to genocide also causes deep emotional trauma. For those affected, fear, hopelessness and dread all have a profound and long-lasting impact. Amid the darkness of genocide, there have always been those who oppose the regime, risking their own lives, homes and communities. Maintaining faith and culture during genocide defies the ambitions of regimes to eradicate entire groups and their culture. Survivors often emphasise that any act of kindness, when surrounded by suffering, indifference and persecution, is powerful.
For the international community, there is a responsibility to shine a light on situations where people are persecuted and hold those responsible to account. Over 75 years since the Holocaust, the stain of genocide has been seen on almost every continent on the planet. So when we remember the Holocaust, we also remember the sad reality of the subsequent genocides that have occurred since.
Rabba
I'll now say the memorial prayer in English and then in Hebrew. Almighty God, full of mercy who dwells on high, provide a sure rest upon the wings of the divine presence, within the levels of the holy and the pure, whose countenance shines like the sky. The souls of the 6 million Jews who were murdered, slaughtered, burnt and exterminated for the sanctification of your name by the Nazi assassins and their collaborators. Let the Garden of Eden be their repose. May the Master of Mercy protect them forever in the protective shelter of his wings, and bind their souls with the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and they shall rest peacefully where they fell. And let us say, Amen. Keil moli rachamim, shoichein b'amaroimim, hamitzei menuchen achoin al kanfei ashchina, b'malois kedoshim, utahoirim, kazoihar, horokia mazhirim, es nishmois, hashishim ribu Yehudim, shenehergu, v'shenishchatu, v'shenisrufu, v'shenisufu al kiddush Hashem. Began Eden teimunu chasam, lochein bal rachamim, yastireim b'seisek nalfav le'olamim, v'yitzroer b'tzroer achayim es nishmoiseim, Hashem unachalasam, v'yanuchu v'shalom al mishkavam, v'noimar, Amen.
Lead me from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead me from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead me from hate to love. Lead me from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe.
The universal prayer for peace is said all around the world by people of all different faiths.
It aims to unite us all for a common cause, no matter our background, culture, race or religion.
Lead me from death to life.
From falsehood to truth.
Lead me from despair to hope.
From fear to trust.
Lead me from hate to love.
From war to peace.
Let peace fill our hearts,
our world and our universe. Amen.